Good evening again, Wisdom class. Let's get on to the next lesson in Chapter 2 of Weathering and Erosion. We're going to be looking at pages 30 to 33. Before we get started in our lecture, I want you to read pages 30 to 31 and then restart the video. Now, when we're talking about weathering, remember we have two kinds of weathering. What was the first one? That's right, mechanical weathering. And mechanical weathering only is talking about changing the shape and size of rocks. Okay? Or another word is physical weathering. The other one we're going to talk about in today's lecture is chemical weathering. Let's say that together. Chemical weathering. And this weathering changes rocks into a new substance. Okay? The first kind of chemical weathering is called oxidation. Now you'll hear in the word oxidation the word oxygen. Okay? And when this happens is the oxygen in the air chemically combines with iron in rocks. Iron is a mineral, and it produces what we call iron oxide or rust. And rust is this orange color layer on the surface of this rock. This also happens to many kinds of metals that have been in the rain for a long period of time. Metal will change to kind of an orangish color and then eventually erode or eventually weather away. The next one is called carbonic acid. Let's say that, carbonic acid. Now, when rain falls from our atmosphere, it carries chemicals to the ground. One of those chemicals is something that we use every day. It's called carbon. Okay, and that's the letter C on our periodic table. Well, it carries it to the surface, and when water breaks down carbon dioxide, it makes what we call carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid is not too dangerous. It's a very, very weak acid, but over a long time, it can dissolve minerals, especially things like calcite or limestone, which are two different sedimentary rocks. It's not too harmful to animals or plants, but it does cause weathering. It's a chemical reaction. This is an example of this. When this carbonic acid gets into the ground, it dissolves limestone and calcite, forming making these formations under the ground in caves. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in this lesson. Now, fossil fuels, we use them every day to cook with, to have electricity, to have this video. We have to have fossil fuels for energy. And the three fossil fuels are coal, oil, and natural gas. Now, when we use these fossil fuels, we're going to talk more about fossil fuels in Chapter 3 when we talk about energy. When we talk about fossil fuels and we burn them, it causes pollution. And when that pollution gets into our atmosphere, it makes what we call sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide. Now, if sulfur dioxide chemically mixes with water, it makes a very, very strong acid called sulfuric acid. Now, if rain brings that sulfuric acid down to the ground, it's what we know as acid rain. Okay, acid rain. Now, this acid rain is very dangerous to plants and animals, and it causes rocks to weather very quickly. This is an example of what can happen to a statue over a long period of time because of acid rain. This is what it looked like when it was first made, and over time, the acid rain has caused this rock to weather. Other things that cause chemical weathering are things called lichens and mosses. Lichens and mosses. These are both plants that grow on rocks, but it's not too dangerous because they only make a very, very weak acid. So this lighter color is what we call the lichens, and the darker green is what we call moss. And it's not too harmful, but it does cause weathering to these rocks and makes them break down. Okay, so before we get on to the next part, I want you to stop the video and read these two pages, and then you can begin again. Now, something that's really cool, this chemical weathering, when that whatever acid comes down from the atmosphere, soaks into the ground, it will go through the cracks of these different minerals and will break down or dissolve these different minerals, especially limestone and calcite, and will make these very, very wonderful formations inside these caves. They're called speleothems. Okay, say that with me, speleothems. Okay, speleo, the first part of that word, comes from the Greek word meaning cave. And then thema comes from the Greek word meaning deposit or to drop. So as the acidic water goes through the ground, it dissolves that calcite and limestone, and it causes them to drip and make these different formations called speleothems. And we call those caves. Now, inside caves, there are many kinds of formations, and it mentions them in your book, but the two most important ones are stalagmites and stalactites. They're very, very similar in pronunciation. Move out of the way so you can see them. Stalagmite and stalactite. Now, the easiest way to remember which one is which is the top one has the letter C in it, meaning think the word ceiling. Ceiling starts with the letter C. Stalactite has the letter C in it. So we know that those are growing from the ceiling or the top of the cave. Now, stalagmite, they kind of grow up from the ground. Now, stalagmite has a G in it, and ground starts with the word, the letter G. So it helps you connect which ones are which. Now, when that limestone dissolves and it goes through the ground, that water will drip, and it will cause sedimentary rock to grow. Okay, and eventually the stalactites and the stalagmites will grow and get longer and longer. Eventually, it will make one thing called a column. And there are other things that you can look in your book when you're referring to caves and how these things grow. Now, the last thing is called spelunkers. Let's say that, spelunkers. Now, spelunkers comes from the word spelunca, and it's just the Latin word for cave. And so somebody that likes to explore caves is called a spelunker. Or if you're going to go explore caves or look inside a cave, you're doing what we call spelunking. So this gentleman here, he's known as a spelunker. Okay. So do the 3 questions at the end of on page 33, and then be ready to discuss this tomorrow. Have a good one.